From Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq to Korea, in slums, in schools, in prisons, and in theaters, every day people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a nonprofit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make sure to thank the team of volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TEDs. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's Johnny McGraw, and I'm the curator for TEDxMSU. This is our 7th ever TEDx conference and our first ever virtual one. We know the year behind us has been one full of many challenges, so we're very grateful to be able to use our platform to share some ideas worth spreading with all of you here tonight. Our conference theme this year is Horizons. Now, a horizon can be what lies ahead, such as a better future for the world, or it can be a point of guidance, something to look to in order to find one's way home. Our 9 amazing speakers really embody this theme, because each and every one of them has been a trailblazer in their own respective fields. Their talks today focus on looking ahead and exploring these new horizons, all of which cover deeply important topics that all of us can learn from. Our team, which is made up entirely of undergraduate students, has been working tirelessly throughout the year in order to make today's virtual experience a memorable one. It's been a pleasure creating this event for all of you, so we hope you all enjoy it as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you. Without further ado, here is our first speaker of the night. Thank you.
COVID-19 has claimed the lives of more than 500,000 Americans, and it's taken the humanity of countless more. I've been lucky to be spared the grip of this virus, but I've been acquainted with one myself. I've been Asian and American my whole life, but I was born in and adopted from Taiwan. And it wasn't until this pandemic that I began to feel so far away from the country of my birth, and as if I'd lived my whole life in a country that promised me a dream, but a promise it couldn't keep. I've met my family in my hometown of Taipei, my birth mother, who was 16 when she had me. And in Taiwan, we look Chinese, we speak Chinese, I don't. We aren't Chinese, but we have a unique place in this country's history, just like people from everywhere else. And yet we're all thrown into this pan-ethnic label, Asian American, a catch-all for half of the world's population. But for my whole life as an adoptee, adopted by wonderful Chinese American parents who look like me, I've lived in San Francisco, California. And I would sit on the roof of my house, look west, past the Golden Gate Bridge, towards the setting sun, and it was a crushing reminder of how far away Taiwan was, literally beyond the horizon, beyond the beginning of the night and where the darkness begins. So I don't see horizons as something hopeful. Rather, to me, a horizon is an orientation, not a destination. Anti-racism, racism, they're kind of like sunsets. You can't ever be at a sunset. You can't touch it, but it touches you. We still paint them. We take pictures of them seriously, millions of pictures of them, because they do something to us. They make us feel a certain way. But you can't touch racism. Racism touches every single one of us, every single day. And an orientation is something to be pointed towards, which of course isn't a bad thing at all. But it's when we mistake an orientation for a destination that we are convinced that we have already reached a post-racial America where racism no longer exists. Look, in San Francisco, I spoke more Spanish than any other language except English. I remember all the times I refused to go to Chinese school. Hell, I even hated Chinese food that didn't come from Panda Express. And my school sat atop a hill from which you could literally look down upon Angel Island, where my ancestors were first hidden away from the rest of America, and Chinatown, where we were told we could never leave. Being an adoptee made me a pessimist growing up because I rarely felt as if I belonged or fit in, even though I'm about as American as it gets. I played varsity baseball in high school, sadly. I have a degree in political science, and I teach teachers how to teach US history. But I'm not here to convince you that I'm American. I am here to tell you that I'm trying to live up to a single standard of what it means to be American is a pursuit of happiness, like the American dream itself, that too many of us as people of color will never reach. A lot of what we've probably heard about anti-racism and social justice has been in pursuit of survival, keeping us alive. But what about thriving? Our joys, our happiness, which go beyond the portrayals of pain and suffering in the news media and the stigmatization of mental health. Part of it comes from how we become racialized, made into an other as Asian Americans, be it the way we look, the languages we speak, or the countries we're from. And yet, many people of color living in this country, like me, have almost no connection to where we're really from. And I'm not alone in saying that America doesn't really feel like home when we're told to go back to places many of us have never been. The Asian community has been under attack for the past year. Assaults on people I've never met, but whose pain I feel as if it were my own. They're the same age as my parents, and I, as an 8-year-old, experienced what it's like to see an Asian American person bleed to death on the pavement in front of me. That individual lost his life after he T-boned my father's car. His blood soaking a pack of baseball cards I clenched in my hands as I uttered the F word for the first time in my life. Now fast forward to a few weeks ago, when news alerts about a mass shooting in Georgia lit up my phone. The image of that Asian American person's lifeless body flashed before me. The difference is that he died by accident, but the 8 victims were murdered in a racist hate crime because a white gunman was having a bad day. The racist stereotypes of being a model minority, the correct way to be a person of color, or a forever foreigner, show me that we need to challenge the assumption that there is a single Asian American experience, and I'm here to offer some advice on how educators and those who care about children can be part of this fight. And I'm not here to tell you some rosy picture about how it's all going to be okay. I'm a pessimist because justice has been denied too many people of color, murdered by police, mass shooters, and white supremacist vigilantes. But I'm also a pessimist in a hopeful profession. Now, my students are future social studies teachers. Teaching and teacher education, this thing I do, are hopeful acts. Teaching is a forward-looking profession. It's where our hopes and dreams for our communities can become reality. And at teaching's core is a fundamental belief that our students' strengths, their passions, identities will imagine a better and brighter future for communities all across this country. And if you want proof, ask my students who are starting their careers as social studies teachers in schools across Michigan during a global pandemic who are still hopeful because they know the impact that they have on their students. And I tell my students that I see myself as a pessimist in a hopeful profession because I'm painfully aware that I am teaching my students to work with a curriculum that I do not see myself represented in. So I don't see horizons as something hopeful. But they're kind of like my home country of Taiwan, because to me, Taiwan is somewhere that feels far away, somewhere that I can maybe aspire to return to someday, somewhere that will always be home to me, but it'll always be an idea. And I'm giving this talk at a time of intense anti-Asian racism and xenophobia, re-emerging because of a pandemic that the previous occupant of the White House called the Chinese virus or the Kung flu. Or again, just weeks ago when 6 Asian American women were murdered by a white supremacist mass shooter in Georgia. But I said I'm in a hopeful profession, which means I and my colleagues believe our work can do something about the violence our kids of color encounter at school and beyond. But it is not just on us as teachers and teacher educators to orient our students towards normalizing counter-narrative storytelling and fighting the racialization of folks of color. We cannot keep mistaking an orientation of anti-racism or even our loftiest ideals like the American dream for a destination. When kids, especially those of us who come to America like me and are taught to be American in social studies classrooms, we learn white middle-class norms and are set up for disappointment when we realize that years later that the American dream is, as David Lavery reminds us, a frail hope rather than a firm promise. And Gloria Ladson-Billings and William Tate point out that so many folks of color feel that we have to self-condemn our identities in order to self-preserve. I think often about the times I had to distance myself, to self-condemn my race, my culture, in order to preserve myself. And in that way, this horizon of a post-racial America, after we've had a black president and now a black woman vice president, is still an orientation, not a destination. And I say that again because we need to disrupt the curriculum we teach our kids and challenge those in power who profit from what we continue to teach our kids. And in our community's classrooms, well-meaning teachers unintentionally cause kids to be ashamed of their identities and histories, or just as problematically taught to see that their culture is a set of stereotypes, food, and festivals, which means that we need to rethink what representation and solidarity look like in our classrooms and how we train our community's teachers. Maybe then the things that made me feel like an outsider as a kid will become an entry point into another student's happiness. Now, with survival and anti-racism as an orientation, and our students and children's joys the destination, here are 3 steps towards centering that happiness of our kids and the kids in our communities as an anti-racist practice, with links that you can scan while you watch, by the way. So, 1. Black Lives Matter at School is an organization of teachers who make 4 demands. 1, that schools fund counselors, not cops. 2, hire more black teachers and teachers of color. 3, teaching black history and ethnic studies every month. And 4, ending zero tolerance policies. Because when Black Lives Matter, we are all lifted up. 2, I want you to be intentional about the books you pick for your kids. It's not just our elementary school teachers' responsibility to choose books for our kids to read. There are organizations advancing Asian American representation in children's libraries in our curriculum. One in particular that you can support right now is the Association of Chinese Teachers, who has worked since the 1960s to combat racism against all Asian Americans in schools. This is an organization you can support with your dollars and help them bring their lesson plans and resources to classrooms all over this country. 3, if you see something, say something. And I don't mean to police or surveil folks of color, but to report incidents you see of violence against Asian Americans by going to stopaapihate.org. And if you see something right now, stop watching, scan this code, and add to our national database that will inform future civil rights legislation. Because, honestly, resistance is not a luxury of convenience, but a necessity of survival. And we need to do better. Because a black square on Instagram isn't resistance, it's safe. It's not like showing up to a protest or risking your safety and privilege for someone you don't even know. And because, look, again, anti-racism, it's like a sunset. It's a horizon, it's an orientation. It cannot be a destination unless we start over with some of the very structures of our schools and country. Because right now, the spiritual, emotional, and physical survival of students of color in this country is the orientation. But our joys and our happiness in school needs to be the destination. We are not there. We will make mistakes, but we need to be in this work together for the long game. From a pessimist in a hopeful profession, take it from me. We must dream big, fight hard, get into a little good trouble, but also look inward to unlearn the assumptions, biases, and stereotypes that cause our children in our communities to self-condemn in order to self-preserve our psyche and our spirit. And maybe then we're going to take a few steps towards our destination. Thank you.
This is my daughter, Olivia. She was born 5 weeks early and couldn't breathe on her own. Machines were keeping her alive with the help of an entire NICU team. She was fighting for her life. She was so fragile that I had to wait 4 days to hold her. When I finally held her in my arms with her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I looked into her eyes with tears welling up in mine, and I promised her that I would do anything to protect her. 2 years later, my son Caleb was born 9 weeks early. He was in critical condition. I held on to every fiber of hope for the entire 10 weeks in the NICU. He was 8 days old when he was finally stable enough to be held. As I cradled his fragile little body hooked to those same tubes and wires, I looked into his eyes and I made the same promise that I had made to his sister 2 years earlier. I would do anything to protect him. As much as I had always wanted to be a mom, I truly had no idea how fiercely I could love 2 little humans. My desire to have children started when I was very young. As I observed the world around me, both real and on TV, I quickly began to understand the rules of becoming a mom. The rules seemed fairly obvious, and I think you'll recognize them. I present to you the patriarchy's 5 steps to motherhood. Date a guy, one with good dad potential, preferably tall, dark, and handsome. Get engaged, down on one knee with a diamond ring, that's required. Rose petals, optional, but strongly recommended. Get married in a church, wearing a white gown, flocked by beautiful bridesmaids and handsome groomsmen. Buy a house in the suburbs, and then have a baby. Boom, motherhood. Those were the rules, and I was a rule follower. So I set out to find the future dad to my future children. The first guy that I considered for the role was my boyfriend, Marty. We always had so much fun together, and he was super cute. But that guy was always getting into fistfights. I mean, that's like questionable on the dad material aspect, so unfortunately, I had to break it off. And I mean, I suppose it was probably a good thing because we were only in the 2nd grade. But in all seriousness, I cannot recall a time during my dating life when I wasn't actively assessing my partners for their potential as the future dad in my perfect little patriarchal life story. During spring semester of my freshman year of college, I met a guy. He was hardworking and success-driven, assertive, smart, had a nice smile, and a quick wit. We started dating. He was my first serious boyfriend in college. He seemed to have good dad potential, and I liked his family and his friends. And then we dated for 3.5 very difficult years. In fact, during our first month of dating, I broke up with him. He had gone into a hot rage about me leaving my books on his kitchen table. So he hurled a heavy mug across the room at me while yelling obscenities and telling me what a piece of garbage I was. Naturally, I told him to never call me again, grabbed my things, and left. And then the cycle began. He called, and he begged to see me. He apologized, but he said that if I hadn't left my books on the table, he never would have been so upset. And that is how every apology went from that day forward. I'm sorry, but if you hadn't, I wouldn't have. Being the high achiever that I am, I spent the next several years attempting to perfect every little thing he ever said that upset him. If you hadn't left your clothes on the bed, I wouldn't have yelled. Got it. Always put the clothes away. If you hadn't hit the snooze button, I wouldn't have stood over you screaming like a drill sergeant that you're a lazy piece of trash while my spit hit your sleeping face. Got it. No snooze button. I didn't internalize his insults right away, but here's the thing about bullies. They will eventually get into your psyche and dislodge every single positive thought you have ever had about yourself. He slowly dismantled my belief in myself and my trust in the people who were telling me that I was awesome. By the time he was graduating from college and I had another year to go, he asked me to marry him. I wish I could tell you that I said no, but I didn't. In fact, I enthusiastically said yes and started planning my dream wedding. And our wedding was a good time. And right after our wedding, we bought a house, and then I was like, it's time to have children, right? But when it came to children, he used my desire to have them as his ultimate source of control. So I modified the rules a little, and I got a dog. Remington was my first dog, and he was the best. He had so much personality. He was determined and strong-willed and very opinionated. I had no idea how much he was preparing me for raising a toddler. Once I had this fur child in my life, it did not take me long to realize that I was not, in fact, married to someone who was quality dad material. The first time I saw him emotionally break my dog was when Remington was in the backyard rolling around in something really stinky, you know, like dogs do. I will spare you the traumatic details, but in that moment, I realized I could never have children with him. I knew I needed to leave to protect myself, Remington, and my future children from him. It took me longer than I care to admit, but with the love, encouragement, support of my family and friends, I broke the rules and I divorced him. I promptly changed my last name back to Wisner, and then I got right back on that patriarchal train. Ugh, Amy. Back to step one, date a guy, rush into a rebound marriage, get divorced again, date some really great guys, also make some severely questionable choices along the way. To avoid turning this into the Taylor Swift of TED Talks, I'll skip the details. But rest assured, I definitely got more dogs. Finally, after several decades of searching for the future dad to my future children, something truly remarkable happened. I questioned the rules. Why do I need a partner for this? Why have I never questioned these rules? Where did these rules even come from? It's the patriarchy. You know, the archaic system of male domination over women, the one that tells us how to look and behave so we can get a man. Gross. My entire world shifted when I started asking why. That well-worn 5-step process for becoming a mom the right way suddenly became utterly meaningless. At 43 years old, I became a single mom by choice. That was and will forever be the best decision I have ever made. Rejecting the rules gave me the greatest gifts of my life, Olivia and Caleb. When people learn that I'm a single mom by choice, they ask a lot of questions, and I am beyond enthusiastic to share every single detail. Ask away. I love telling this story. It's the story of my 2 true loves of my life, my children. And whether I'm talking about my decision to become a single mom, or to stop coloring my gray hair, or to get divorced twice, or to leave a job I hated, I embrace every opportunity to encourage, support, and empower another person to always question the rules, to reject the rules that don't fit for them, to be vulnerable and be authentic, to be a rebel. But when I thought about sharing my rebel story on this stage, I was scared. I kept trying to academically explain why we all need to join forces to dismantle the patriarchy. Why was I so scared? Because I knew that if people actually watch this talk, I'm opening myself up to the internet trolls. The shame, judgment, criticism, name-calling, and gaslighting that is rampant online is frighteningly similar to what I experienced for 8.5 years with an abuser. And internet bullies? They don't even have to face you when they're hurling insults. They just cowardly sit behind a keyboard spewing hatred. I was afraid of those bullies. I was afraid of receiving their hateful messages. However, thanks to my beautiful support system of wisdom-hearted women and a few men, I was loved, supported, and encouraged to move through my fear and tell my story, to inspire others to question everything. You see, the patriarchy will tell you to get in your gender box and follow the rules. It'll convince you that if you don't conform, you're not worthy of love, and that you are to be bullied until you follow the rules. Girls, here are your rules. You must date, marry, and have babies with only boys. And in the service of men, you must be young, beautiful, virginal, submissive, quiet, nurturing, powerless, and opinionless. Be the caretakers of men and children and everyone around you. Perfect your body and your home and your kids and appear perfectly ageless. Your entire body should be hairless, except that on your head, of course, that should be voluptuous and blonde, or maybe brunette, but definitely not gray. Women who assert their power are called bitches. We're told to be thin, but not too thin. Be fit, but not too fit. And what's crazy is that the system has manipulated us to keep ourselves in check, to judge, criticize, and shame ourselves if we don't look young enough, pretty enough, thin enough, fit enough. I have plenty of personal examples, but most recently, when I learned that I was going to be giving a TED Talk, my reaction was, yes! Ooh, I'm so nervous. Oh shit, I need to lose some weight. We look in the mirror and we focus on what needs to change, what needs to be perfected. We are doing the patriarchy's dirty work in our minds all the time. Boys and men, the patriarchy has rules for you too. To be a man, boys are told to man up, act like a man. Boys don't cry. Every message tells them that the worst thing they could be is a girl, because girls are weak. When boys and men don't follow the rules of the patriarchy, especially those who are attracted to men instead of women, they are shamed, mocked, bullied, physically threatened, beaten, and sometimes they're killed. When they get emotional, boys are told, that's so gay, or dude, stop being such a chick. Boys and men who are feminine will always suffer the harshest judgment in a patriarchy. The artistic, emotional, and gentle-spirited ones, the passive, shy, and affectionate ones, the small, delicate, fragile ones. Feminine men threaten the entire system. A system of male domination cannot survive if its men don't act like men. But here's the thing. Even though men are in a position of power in the patriarchy, it has set them up for failure too. According to the World Health Organization, Western men are 3 to 4 times as likely to kill themselves as women. Why? Because seeking help is seen as a threat to masculinity. A world built on the belief that boys and men must be toxically masculine and that girls and women are inferior to men, that is not the world I want for my children. When I look at what's going on in society, I see too many parallels with my personal experience of emotional abuse. Shame, judgment, criticism, name-calling, gaslighting. Remember that promise I made to my babies? I would do anything to protect them. It is time for something to change, and I'm here to ask for your help. When I left my marriage, I did it with support and love and encouragement. I could not have done it alone, and I can't do this alone. We need to join forces against the bullies, the internet trolls, and the shame messengers in our real lives. We need to shut it down. To my children, Olivia and Caleb, society is going to tell you how to live your life. It is going to give you rules. Please, don't wait 40 years to question those rules. Question everything now. Ask why, and then ask why again and again and again. Push people to answer those questions thoughtfully every single time. Know your value. Know what you value. Choose your rules and choose them wisely. To all of the grown-ups, it's not too late. We have a lot to unlearn, but we can do it together. It is time to start a rebellion. Together, we can cancel the patriarchy. I hope that you will join Olivia and Caleb and me. Thank you.
In my last month of my medical school career, I had the opportunity to travel to Malawi for one of my med school rotations. I was placed in the OB-GYN ward, and as a naive medical student out in the field, I imagined myself delivering babies and saving the world. That's the dream, right? In those 5 short weeks, however, I left the country with more to reflect on than what I thought I was offering. My time in Malawi would reignite something deep within me that went missing in med school, especially during my hardcore studying for 12 hours and still trying to stay sane days. What my Malawian experience taught me was the importance of remembering that the fundamental truth to our humanity is each other. Reflect on a time when you just felt connected. Not the superficial rom-com kind. I mean truly seen, heard, and valued. There are moments in life where you connect with another human being on a very deep level. It may be a breakthrough with a sibling, sharing a vulnerable moment with a therapist. How about an honest conversation with a complete stranger in a McDonald's bathroom where you just are from? True story, by the way. My connected moment was in Queen Elizabeth Central Hospital in Blantyre, a city in Malawi. Now, one thing that makes medicine in Malawi vastly different from America is that some of the patients that present to the public hospitals live in villages below the poverty line. They embark on the hours-long journey to the hospital into the city. Then, they remain there for weeks, even months, awaiting their workup. Whether it's obtaining labs, getting a biopsy, a surgical procedure, maybe even getting a CAT scan. Now, mind you, there is still only one CAT scanner in all of Blantyre, and even that only sort of kind of works. These patients aren't able to go back home because, well, they don't have the means to return. Many of these patients are there for weeks by themselves. Maybe they're scared, apprehensive, doubtful. But you know what they aren't? Alone. Every morning I would walk into the OB-GYN ward and I would see new faces of new patients. But they didn't act like they were new. There was almost a camaraderie of sorts, where these women just looked after each other. They were laughing, sharing each other's food, comforting each other. They gossiped about things that I wish I could understand because I didn't speak the language. Women who were fortunate enough to get a bed in the ward shared with women who were sleeping on the floor because there just weren't enough beds for all the patients. Their solidarity in its purest form was effortless. I also noticed that the Malawian med students actually had time to sit with their patients and chilled with them. Because we work closely with the local med students, we kind of kicked it with our patients too. We learned a lot about our patients by bringing down our medical persona, that guard that we always have up. And we talked to them on a personal level, really getting to know them, where one pregnant mom, she wanted me to name her child. We got very intimate with the patients. I was taking care of a patient who had recently been diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer. She had been in the hospital for a few weeks, waiting for her diagnosis and possible treatment. The biopsy returned, and her cancer was inoperable. She was told she only had a few months left to live. I can't even begin to imagine what was going through her mind. But from the outside looking in, you would have never guessed that she just received a terminal diagnosis. She continued talking to her fellow hospital mates and laughing with her 10-month-old in her arms. As we were talking to her and playing with her son, she looked up at one of the local med students and out of nowhere told him to give her child. Honestly, we didn't really understand. She barely knew us, yet had faith that he would be taken care of with us. Without sharing a language or culture, she felt that fundamental human connection. She was willing to entrust us with her own son, her flesh and blood. Don't worry, guys, I didn't take her up on the offer for this adorable son. But that's human connection, isn't it? It's a rare commodity these days in America. It's still out there, but we're losing our grasp on it. Now, when I came back home and started my family medicine residency training, I found myself constantly reflecting on my experience in Malawi. Furthermore, I found myself reflecting on my own experiences of community engagement throughout my med school years here in Detroit. What was it about those emotions that I felt, and why was it consistently missing in our healthcare here? We have one of the strongest healthcare systems in America, with amazing resources, technology, and pretty good health outcomes. Despite that, there are so many individuals willing to share a personal story about poor bedside manners by a staff, nurse, physician. Patients will complain their doctor was unempathetic, aloof, detached, or one of the worst complaints, the doctor barely spent time with me. We have a problem in our healthcare systems. As a young physician, I noticed that yes, although we were taking good care of our patients, we also were not taking good care of our patients. Let me explain. Gallbladder surgery is such a common and routine procedure in the medical world that we don't even blink an eye. But it's still surgery. To a patient who has no medical background, it can be daunting. I can manage an infected gallbladder. The meds we use, the imaging we order, the consulting services we seek, there's a written protocol for all that. But what we're not taught as well is how to tackle the anxiety in our patients leading up to the procedure. Anxiety about anesthesia, breathing from a tube, or really, how about the anxiety of cutting up your skin and actually removing a whole damn organ? I can manage a foot infection on a homeless individual because he was walking in the wet snow for hours, maybe days, and putting himself at risk for a frostbite with eventual amputation of his foot, but I dare not hold his hand and comfort him. Why is it that our outcomes on cancer and heart disease can surpass other countries, but our mental health diseases are skyrocketing? An all-time high, 30% of Americans were diagnosed with anxiety and depression just in the past year. With suicide as the number 2 cause of death between the ages of 10 and 35. Let that sink in for a while. 10-year-olds in America are taking their own life. One of the problems in America's health system is the lack of community. We have disconnected. Us healthcare staff and them, the patients. We're failing to connect with our fellow human beings. When we studied medicine, we ultimately forgot humanity. While brutally learning every organ system in our bodies and its relation to one another, we somehow missed learning about the mind and soul 101. How to see, how to hear, how to value people. The human connection. That was until COVID. In a state of pure and utter chaos around the world, we somehow drifted back to our human core. The concept of human connection was back, but this time it was wearing a mask, sanitized, and stood 6 feet apart. Working in a Detroit hospital, one of the main epicenters of Michigan, during a worldwide pandemic was humbling. It was one of the first times in my healthcare career that I actually felt somewhat of a community forming. We were a united front against a microscopic enemy. There were healthcare workers comforting each other, helping out with the personal protective equipment. Doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists covering for each other's shifts out of pure exhaustion. We felt that connection, especially when community members donated masks to hospitals. When we saw footage of children collecting sanitizers from their neighbors and dropping them off to local clinics. It was heartwarming. Working in the intensive care unit was a little different. I unfortunately experienced terminally weaning patients off of the ventilator. That's basically when we turn off what is known as life support. So pre-COVID, when we terminally weaned a patient, we would invite all the family members to gather around the patient. Sometimes there would be music playing, maybe a chaplain present, all of this to help the family ease the transition of their dying loved one. However, during COVID, as families could not be present during this solemn moment, we would call them on FaceTime and hold the patient's hands for them as we turned off the life-saving machines. One time, we were weaning off a patient who had been a part of our ICU team for about a month. Her medical health was decompensating, and there came a point where the family had to make the tough decision to make her DNR, do not resuscitate. The whole medical team took her to a separate room for privacy. We used our phones to have the family on FaceTime, and as my fellow residents started the process of terminally weaning, removing her breathing tube, one of the nurses grabbed our hands as well as the patient's and started reciting a Christian prayer. I'm not even Christian, and she had me welled up in tears. Even within our head-to-toe covered PPEs, I felt connected to everyone in the room. The current environment in our healthcare system is more or less rough. We need to invite change into this system. But of course, I'm not talking to an audience of healthcare workers. I'm not saying you have to go to Africa or become a doctor to feel connected to those around you. It just shouldn't have to take a pandemic for us to seek connection. Looking into the horizon of our future, I hope we can all look deep within. Ask ourselves, what can I do in my life to connect with someone else? How do we start to form that community that we also desperately need to survive in this world? Early on in the pandemic outbreak, we had a patient who was one of the first COVID patients. He was immediately intubated and sent to the ICU. I joined his medical journey about a month and a half later. I remember walking into his room and seeing him on the ventilator and medications through his IV that were pretty much keeping him alive. After about 1 to 2 weeks, however, he made a turning point. One day, we were ready to extubate him. The team inside the room removed the tube from his throat, and as we waited in anticipation, he started breathing on his own. First thing he did was turn his head to the left, and you know what he saw? A group of ICU staff and caretakers gawking at him through this glass door, cheering him on, giving each other the COVID elbow shakes. He sheepishly smiled and raised his thumb to give us a thumbs up. To be honest, I don't think he knew he had COVID at the time. I don't even think he knew what COVID was at the time. He didn't realize why we were so excited. You see, he was one of the first few patients who had become a COVID survivor. And at that time in the world, we didn't know what was to be expected. Despite all that fear, we found hope in him. All he felt was this human connection. In fact, we all
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Watkins, and I am the owner of Agency of Joy, a queer-owned consulting agency specializing in digital storytelling. And this is my story. It's just not working out anymore. A line that might trigger a negative feeling from a lot of us in this room, and those of you watching online. Whether it's coming from a partner or a boss, hearing it usually doesn't mean anything good. Well, that was a line delivered to me by my program director one bright fall day in 2014. I was 24 years old, less than 2 years out of college, and living the dream I had at the time to work at a nonprofit where LGBTQ+ justice was my focus. The program's mission was to reconcile Christian faith and religion with LGBTQ+ identity and life, and I was contracted to be the consulting editorial assistant. It was my job to manage the program's website and social media, and my performance was never less than outstanding. At my 6-month review, my program director and senior editor both commended me on how well I was doing. In that short time, I had already made them jump for joy when a graphic I created went semi-viral after actress and transgender rights activist Laverne Cox reshared it on her Instagram. They extended my contract and approved me for the raise I put in for. So, when my boss, a dark-haired, white gay man in his 50s, called me into an office and said, "It's just not working out anymore," and to leave before I could finish my workday, I couldn't believe it. And when I asked why, his next words were said with such a sharpness I can still hear today. Either you're playing dumb and you know, or you really don't know and I just don't care to explain it to you anymore. And that was that. As I realized what was going on, I looked out into the rest of that 11th floor office to see the faces of people who would no longer be my coworkers. Then, I packed up my belongings one last time, saying as little as I could until I reached a street downstairs where I would call my mom to tell her what happened, while the rage and tears I was feeling finally began to spill out. I had just been fired from my first professional job out of college, without any notice or explanation. This all happened in the start of September, my favorite time of year in New York, when the energy around the city, like the air of a changing season, seems to burst with new energy everywhere. But after that conversation with my boss, the world was turned off. The potential energy of the afternoon robbed in a moment's notice. Before I was fired, I had believed my program team could do no wrong. But as I thought back on my experiences there that summer, a couple stood out. I had been getting called into more meetings with my program team, the most memorable being the time I was politely asked by 2 queer and Christian bosses of mine to not publicly disclose that I'm agnostic when working, going so far as to say that people might not trust the brand if it came out. Not only did I disagree with this completely, but I was also hurt that my spirituality was being used against me, the same way conservative Christian clergy use theirs to deny queer, trans, and non-binary folk of our humanity. Now, this was a thing the program was working to change. Another time, I was told they didn't agree with the decision made by our executive director to make me the youth representative to the United Nations, another dream role of mine. That is me standing in the Rose Garden of the New York United Nations headquarters. And as you can see, my joy was through the roof. But looking back on it, it seemed like every success I was having on my own that summer was being perceived as a threat by these 2. And because I was brought in on the terms of a consultant, not a staff person, it would be an easy fix to replace me. The good thing about this story, though, was that this was not the end of the road for me. As my career has evolved into more than I've ever dreamed of, I've learned through both my own experience and through the stories shared with me by so many, that for populations of color, and especially queer and trans folk, there seems to be an unspoken culture at large that's holding many of us back from having an authentic seat at the table. Its name is white supremacy culture. Now, while it's been proven that the danger of white supremacists is rising, many of us in the United States still only associate white supremacy with neo-Nazis sporting swastikas for fun, white people storming the US Capitol, or the attacks of places of worship. But turns out, white supremacy culture is so widespread, it can show up in everyday workplace or classroom settings. For every microaggression, when you think your race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender is the cause, well, there's language that exists to challenge this dominant culture we're all born into. In their 2001 workbook, Dismantling Racism, a workbook for social change groups, Kenneth Jones and Tema Okun list out 11 traits of white supremacy culture in the workplace. Today, I will introduce 3 of these, which I think are most important to know. The first is power hoarding, which they define as those with power feel threatened when anyone suggests changes in how things should be done in a company or organization. Now, this is the case because, as Jones and Okun tell it, any suggestions for change are seen by those in power as a direct reflection of their own leadership skills. And now, I've seen this occur in many progressive institutions, especially ones where the director or CEO happens to also be the founder. Admittedly, this can be a challenging position. To keep yourself open to constructive criticism for an entity that they created. That said, change should always be seen as inevitable, and challenges to leadership can be healthy and productive. Without this being understood and named, it can be easy for a new employee, especially one who is of color and maybe queer, trans, or non-binary, to feel discouraged to share any ideas that might call for change. Another trait of white supremacy culture is the fear of open conflict, which Okun and Jones define as people in power equating the raising of difficult issues with being impolite, rude, or out of line. This is a trait I've also seen play out way too many times to count. In one personal experience, I was in Paris working around the 2015 UN climate negotiations. Now, at a dinner with colleagues from around the world, I was racially profiled by an American couple sitting next to our table. I was the only Black American at the dinner, and this couple would not stop staring at me until I asked them not to. Upon communicating this request for respect, a colleague of mine said that I was rude for doing so, for asking people to respect my humanity. According to her and white supremacy culture, I was rude for raising the issue, not the couple for treating me differently than the rest of my dinner party. The last trait I'd like to point to today is the right to comfort. Now, Okun and Jones define this as a belief that those with power have the right to emotional and psychological comfort. And this is a big one, because in other words, it's saying that logic is more valuable over emotion. In that same scenario of me in Paris, one could argue that my colleague simply wanted her right to comfort that night. She didn't want to have a conversation about race and the covert and subvert racism I was experiencing, especially in a public restaurant. It was easier to name me rude from within her purview, instead of welcoming discomfort to possibly deepen her understanding and awareness of systemic racism and oppression. Now, in their analysis, Okun and Jones stress how all 11 traits of white supremacy culture are damaging to everyone, both to Black and people of color, as well as white people. But more importantly, they spell out how workplaces unconsciously use these norms and standards without being proactively named or chosen by the group. In other words, we're playing a game we didn't know we were playing. I didn't know any of this language some years ago, so when I lost that job, a job I loved, it hurt my soul. And I would later discover that, like shattered glass on the floor, remnants of that trauma would show up in me for years to come. When I landed my next job several months later, I would have anxiety about every little thing I did, thinking I was always one step away from being fired. The job after that, I was so committed to my own self that I started to see how white supremacy culture was showing up in me. I was so committed to my own success above all that I started to lack accountability and drove myself into isolation. Because, don't get it twisted, Jones and Okun explain it that Black and people of color can demonstrate traits of white supremacy culture as well. It took almost 4 years after that first job of mine to be introduced to this language of white supremacy culture in the workplace. Until then, I still only talked about the stressors of my work as just that, random, disconnected events that seem to follow me as a Black person working in primarily progressive white spaces. I had a yearbook's worth of experiences, but as my way of coping, I always swept them under the rug, reducing it down to, shit white people do. My way of providing comedic relief after a long day, week, month, or year of dealing with stress at work. For Black people and many populations of color, we're taught from an early age how we have to work twice as hard just to be seen equal to a white person doing the same thing. And while I am proud of my generation for how we continue to push the boundary of what's acceptable, as I've learned from my therapist, the work is never really done. Giving something a name gives it power. Now, whether good or bad is up to us once we're made self-aware. But as culture is so hard to define, having a tangible resource with definitions and examples, like what Jones and Kuhn have so beautifully provided, can go a long way. Language is powerful and intentional, and it's our duty to use it as a tool to empower those around us, those of you who I know are still shining within the shadows. For me, learning there was this defined language with named traits for the same kind of experiences that I faced in my early career felt like receiving 1,000 hugs at once. Finally, the healing could begin. After years of internal battles, thinking that I was wrong or undeserving of success, I now start to regain that self-confidence I lost over all those years. And more importantly, I could now look back on that first job of mine without feeling all of that pain from that September day. I could finally come to terms with how that programming team, while saying they wanted to be diverse and multicultural, really only allowed other people and cultures to come in if they adapted or conformed to what they wanted. Now, as I healed, I was able to begin owning my full self again, my beauty and the imperfections. The more I stepped into that, the more I became who I am, and the more success I had on my own. After building a career for myself within the climate justice space as a social media director, in 2018, I no longer wanted to be tied to the restraints of one single employer. By then, I had been working nonstop for years and had saved enough money to quit my job and take some time off. 2 months later, my company, Agency of Joy, was born. Now, I am my own go-to for social change-driven leaders, organizations, and companies looking to build their online engagement, storytelling, or begin a culture shift within. Becoming, and now being, an entrepreneur has been quite the dream adventure. As a company, we've worked with over a dozen clients and partner organizations, mostly led by Black women or women of color, to advance social justice through their work, art, community, and more. And on top of that, I've been able to grow and support a phenomenal team of Agency of Joy project consultants who I match with me depending on each project. And those are some of those shining faces right there. As a queer and Black business owner, everything I do at Agency of Joy seeks to challenge white supremacy culture and invoke culture shift. It requires courage to be vulnerable, both with my clients, my team, and myself. But it's worth it. From leading with love and still having boundaries, saying no and being okay with it, creating a joyful space for collaboration, trusting my gut, and knowing when to ask for help. These are the traits of the better world I envision, and it's what I'm most proud of. Now, while my career hasn't been success after success, understanding white supremacy culture as something we're all born into and must actively dismantle and challenge has dramatically impacted how I view myself and the impact that I have. I think about those of you watching at home, those of you here right now, and I know that you've experienced traits of white supremacy culture, whether you knew it or not. When your professor or boss wouldn't accept your amazing idea unless it was written out in a specifically formatted memo. When you're dismissed simply because you display feelings or emotions. Or when those in power are so afraid of conflict, especially around race, that they try to ignore it or avoid it altogether. I know too that you can feel uncomfortable or even unsafe to address microaggressions like this in the moment. But thanks to the work of Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones, for starters, there's definitions and examples that affirm these one-off occurrences and connect the dots to how people and organizations use these norms and standards, making it difficult, if not impossible, for queer, non-binary, and trans Black and brown folk like you and I to be our full selves. Because the thing about white supremacy culture in this country, especially now, is that its goal is to maintain false narratives. It's about lifting up stories that present a picture not based in truth, not based in a vision of joy for all, but in the protection of maintaining whiteness as the standard. That's why it's so important we're aware of these traits, because that self and cultural awareness is important. From there, you can then be empowered to make changes. To those of you here today, and those of you watching online, I see the potential in you all to be your own agents of joy, owning the multifaceted parts of yourself and challenging white supremacy culture in your own authentic way. I see faces beaming with light, love, and tremendous opportunities. I see possibilities for yourselves that weren't even possible just 5 to 10 years ago. I see a world where the culture of white supremacy that got us here is disrupted. A world where being our whole selves is the new norm. We didn't talk about white supremacy culture in that first job of mine. I can't say I wouldn't still have been fired had I known those traits now, but I definitely might have saved myself years of insecurity, self-doubt, and shame that would hold me back from my true potential, my true joy. We owe it to ourselves to work at our highest frequency, and often that starts in the work or school environment we're in. The time to be aware of white supremacy culture is now, especially in work and higher education settings. Whether it's in a one-on-one meeting with your supervisor, leading in HR training for your team, or just studying Okun and Jones's work for your own self-assessment, being aware of and naming this culture of white supremacy will help more of us get to that better world I believe is possible. Thank you.
A father and son are in a horrible car crash, and the dad is killed. The son is rushed to the hospital. And just as the son is about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I cannot operate on this child. This boy is my son." Now, I'm assuming many of you are confused. Does this boy have two fathers? Or did I just misunderstand the story? The conclusion to the story is that the surgeon is a female and also the mother of the boy. Now, I would be lying to you if I said I was unpuzzled by the story the very first time I heard it, even as a female medical student myself. This implicit bias that a lot of us just now experience leads directly today into my talk on STEMism. STEMists brilliantly combine STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, with the foundations of feminism, and have a profound impact on women pursuing careers in both healthcare and in research. However, gender inequality in medicine and STEM is a very complex matter. Issues ranging from representation in the field, mistreatment, and acknowledgement affect women in their training and beyond. As a third-year medical student in the College of Osteopathic Medicine here at Michigan State, I have finally started my hospital rotations. And this has changed my perspective on medicine from one of bookwork, which we call our first and second pre-clerkship years, to actual healthcare implementation in the hospitals, which we call our third and fourth year hospital rotations. With this change has come the greater appreciation for flagrant prejudice in the healthcare field, however. Issues go well beyond being misaddressed as someone other than a medical student by a patient. Unfortunately, this was something I was very much accustomed to given my time in pre-clerkship. However, I didn't expect for similar prejudgments to be made by other healthcare employees as well. For example, one of the most impactful days I had at the hospital was my very first day of rotations. And not just because it was the very first day of rotations. I went down to the hospital security office to get my hospital badge. And this is literally a badge of honor medical students wear on their white coat when they finally enter the hospital. I was greeted by two security officers, and I had my photo and credentials recorded. The security officer looked to me and asked me what nursing school I attended, and I corrected her by saying I'm actually a medical student. She went ahead and printed my badge and handed it to me, but it still said nursing student on it. To me, it felt like there was always going to be a disconnection between my gender and the position I was assuming at the hospital, regardless of the way I expressed it. It's hard for me to believe also that a male medical student would find himself in a similar circumstance if he were asking for his medical school ID badge. This was my very first interaction in the healthcare field, and unfortunately, it was not a very welcoming one. First impressions are lasting impressions. Unfortunately, there is worse yet. During my surgery rotation, I had the most memorable experience of my medical career thus far. It was a very early morning, rounding with the surgery team, and I was put in charge of changing the large abdominal wound packing for one of the patients. While I was preparing for the procedure and putting my gloves on, the patient said to me, "Why would I be wasting my time trained to be a physician when I would inevitably get married, become pregnant, and have to stay at home to raise children?" I was literally speechless, and I had no words. Even if I had words, nothing could come out. It's truly heartbreaking to hear that to some patients, my time, effort, and financial commitment to medicine is meaningless and wasteful. Like gender roles in a household or in politics, a woman's role in medicine is very much ingrained in our society. Simply put, the man is supposed to be the physician, and the woman is supposed to be the medical assistant, the secretary, or the nurse. It's very challenging for society to recognize a female as the physician at first conjuncture. The public's thoughts are reflexively opposite. It was best said by Ruth Bader Ginsburg when asked about the number of women serving on the U.S. Supreme Court. When there are 9 women, people are shocked. But there have been 9 men, and no one ever raised a question about that. It would be equally as notable if you went to a doctor's clinic and all the physicians were female. Would that raise a question for you? What if all the physicians were male? would that raise a question for you? Were there issues with representation in the field, discrimination, and mistreatment, and predictably followed? These experiences and harmful words spoken to women in STEM are much like crumpling a paper. No matter how many times you try to iron it out and remove those wrinkles, they will remain there. And symbolically, the emotional wounds are still present. Furthermore, this past month at the hospital, I have been blessed with the opportunity to administer COVID vaccines to hundreds of patients. And this has been the most exciting and fulfilling experience for healthcare providers like myself. It's so exciting to dose out Fauci ouchies, and patients are so excited and grateful to see the light at the end of this very dark tunnel we've been on. During one of my clinic days, for a still uncertain reason, I had a patient say to me, "It's the blonde leading the blonde around here." By combining the perceived female physician inferiority with the dumb blonde stereotype, you can imagine my paper was feeling quite wrinkled at the end of the day. It's hard for me to believe also that a male medical student who's blonde, who's administering COVID vaccines, will be told the same thing if he were there that day. Good news, however, we are on the horizon of a new generation of medical students. For the very first time in history, in 2019, women make up 50.5%, meaning the majority of medical students here in the United States. And this will have a profound impact on the face of medicine for decades to come. We need physicians in the hospital who are like the patients they are seeing, so patients feel related to and understood on a deeper level. A patient's health relies on it. Of equal importance, we need female physicians to be mentors to female residents and female medical students. One of the very intimidating responsibilities of a third-year medical student like myself is getting ready to apply to residency and preparing for interviews and applications. We have an online database that helps us navigate this process. We can apply filters such as the specialty we're interested in, the location, salary, and even if healthcare or childcare is provided by the hospital. And once I applied the filters that meet my interests, and I also applied the childcare filter. And when I looked at the results, they went astronomically low. As low as to say there are no programs here in Michigan that offer childcare in the hospital. And for me, I applied this filter out of complete curiosity. I currently don't have any children, but it's something that's in the plans for the years I will be completing my residency. And this experience really made me think, who will I go to when I'm balancing childcare, motherhood, and residency when that time approaches in my life? And who will I go to for support and advice and to ask questions to when there are very few women navigating the same circumstances? And finally, how does it make me feel to know that some women need to make a choice between the growth of their family with pursuing a fellowship or getting a high-raising medical director role? Women need to see other women in their fields, whether that field be politics, journalism, medicine, or any other career. Women need to see other women breaking boundaries, shattering ceilings, and having the most fulfilling lives and careers imaginable. Women need other women, because if you can see her, you can be her. Being a woman in medicine is both a challenging and empowering position to navigate. I continually draw on the car accident story when speaking about doctors and nurses alike, especially when not in their immediate company. The assumption does not have to be he, his, him when speaking about doctors, and she, her, hers when speaking about nurses. This reinforces false stereotypes. These words are impactful even when they are said without much consideration or acknowledgement. Intentional word use is an effective and easy way to show mutual respect, and we must all do it. Although the STEM gap has persisted for a very long time, it does not mean it should last forever. We hear the concept of nature versus nurture, or genetics versus the environment, frequently in the science fields, whether it be applied to intellect, personality, or the development of a disease. The brilliant paradox of this notion is that the women scientists studying it are also the ones falling victim to it. There's nothing natural about women being underrepresented in STEM. This has come through the nurture of society. But it will also be through nurture that women will reach equality with men in STEM. Steps such as increasing female representation in higher-ranking medical positions, creating a more respectful and welcoming medical community, and providing motherhood workplace support are essential first steps we can take. We must support the STEMinists in our lives and raise our children to be strong, inclusive future STEMinists. Serena Williams said it best: "The success of every woman should be the inspiration to another, and we must raise each other up." Thank you so much.
It's 2021, and we are watching our world burn. Literally. Our fossil fuel-intensive lifestyle is increasing global temperatures, which is leading to changes in our hydrologic systems and atmospheric circulation. The altered conditions will continue to amplify temperature extremes, drought, flooding, and storms. And the consequences of climate change are not only detrimental to ecosystems, but also jeopardize infrastructure, agricultural production, clean water access, energy access, and human health, disproportionately affecting low-income communities and people of color. This is the future that my generation and generations to come have been dealt. And if actions aren't taken now to change the course that we're headed, we will have to live with the irreversible damage. And that's not a fate I'm ready to accept. Fortunately, there is hope on the horizon. Renewable technologies such as onshore wind turbines and photovoltaic solar arrays are well-established solutions that can decarbonize our energy sector and work toward mitigating climate change. So far, hundreds of local governments in almost 15 states have committed to powering their communities with 100% renewable energy. The aspiration for a zero-emission grid has even been discussed at the national level. Unfortunately, there are many challenges that still need to be understood and addressed to bring this goal to fruition. One of increasing importance that I'm going to shed light on today is a lack of support from host communities. Research has shown that wind and solar energy are accepted by the public in theory, but encounter project-impeding resistance during development. States all over the US have experienced postponements or cancellations of renewable energy projects due to public opposition. This discrepancy between high support for renewable energy in a general sense and a low support for renewable energy on the ground is described as the social gap. There's evidence that suggests that the social gap results from project proposals failing to meet people's conditions for acceptable development, which usually entail context-specific measures that limit impacts on the local residents and environment. Incompatible project proposals can be linked back to the reliance on conventional public processes that tend to put the community members in the backseat of decision-making, not allowing them to tailor the project to meet their qualifications. Instead, the process typically involves government officials working on the sidelines with renewable energy developers to make a decision, announce it to the public, and then defend any criticisms that come forth. Community members can get frustrated by this approach because there's no real opportunity to contribute. By the time they are invited to get involved, the decision has already been made. And more often than not, it's an outcome that is best suited for the officials and developers and less so for the public. This decide, announce, defend model is a manifestation of hierarchical decision-making that superficially permits public input. Citizens that are unable to meaningfully participate in the public process may take drastic measures such as protests, petitions, or even legal actions to get their voice heard. Not only is this unproductive because it can derail progress towards a clean energy future, but it can also cause community division and distrust in leaders. The thing is, it doesn't have to be this way. Most decision makers just follow this format because it's the minimum they have to do to involve the public according to the law. But they can and should do more. The public process needs to be revamped to put the community members in the driver's seat so that they can set the bar for the type of renewable development that they prefer or are at least willing to live with. Gratiot County, Michigan has turned this idea into reality. In the summer of 2012, 133 wind turbines went online in the county, spanning over 30,000 acres of agricultural land. Though the Gratiot County wind farm is the largest wind farm in Michigan to date, it is also one of the most highly supported projects in the state. The story of Gratiot County starts and ends in collaboration. Ever since the 1970s, Gratiot County has engaged residents, businesses, and municipalities to come together and efficiently plan strategies to promote economic development. The 2008 recession hit the area particularly hard, which had the county scrambling to find ways to improve the local economy. At the same time, the wind industry in the US was booming. Seeing a potential opportunity, county officials reverted to their collaborative roots to start a conversation with the greater community to see if and how wind energy could fit in Gratiot. As this idea was considered, consultants were brought in to provide people with as much information as possible to clarify unknowns or resolve misunderstandings about wind energy. The community expressed interest in potentially having a wind farm in the area, but not unconditionally. The government officials were cognizant of this as they moved forward in creating a wind zoning ordinance, making the process fully transparent to identify and accommodate any public concerns. Widespread notices for the ordinance meetings were made through newspapers, radio, and the internet. Plus, the county leveraged its connections with the townships and Chamber of Commerce to further spread the word. This widely disseminated information grabbed people's attention and resulted in 300 or more citizens showing up at any one of the 20+ meetings. Each one of these individuals was given the opportunity to help craft the wind ordinance. Participants self-organized into groups on topics that they cared about and were responsible for coming up with recommendations. The products of this were the driving influence for what the Executive Committee of Planning turned into a legitimate zoning ordinance. And not long after the ordinance was finalized, the aforementioned Gratiot County Wind Farm was proposed and unanimously approved by the 4 townships it spanned. Continuing in the spirit of community engagement, every resident in the project area was presented the chance to partake in a pooling easement, which pretty much granted participants a lease payment even if they did not host a wind turbine on their property. This initiative was well received, with 250 families volunteering to sign up. Needless to say, the launching of Gratiot County's first wind farm was a huge success. Wind energy has become a part of the community's pride ever since. So much so that there has been a welcome expansion of even more wind farms over time. Currently, Gratiot County has 345 wind turbines and counting. Now, the actions of this rural Michigan community offer 3 key lessons about how to implement an effective public process. First is start early. In this case, people were encouraged to actively participate in the creation of the wind zoning ordinance. Setting the regulations for wind development is the earliest part of the decision-making process, and this is where citizens need to be heavily involved, because at this stage, citizens can affect change. Allowing the community to essentially reflect their conditions for renewable energy development into the rule of the land is the best way to send a clear message to developers about exactly what kind of projects the community will accept. Not only does this practice safeguard the community from ill-suited projects, but it also prevents developers from wasting time and resources on a proposal that may be a lost cause. Second is get participants. In Gratiot County, there were hundreds of people that were engaged early on. The more voices at the table, the more perspectives that can be considered in the decision-making, which can lead to better outcomes. The high volume of participants was a result of government officials doing more than just the legal requirements for public notice. They broadcast opportunities for involvement through every avenue that they knew how. This increased awareness raising helped increase attendance. Government officials that are willing to get creative and go beyond the business as usual methods will likely have better turnout. And third, empower the community. Gratiot County leaders put the public in charge from the get-go. Citizens had decision-making roles of their choosing that allowed them to shape elements of the wind ordinance. Not only did they have ownership of those decisions, but they also had a physical sense of ownership by signing up for the pooling easement. People who have some sort of personal tie to a project are more likely to want to see it succeed. Not to mention that the main critique of the standard public meeting format is that the public can provide input, but nothing is meaningfully done with it. So instead, giving people a voice and acting on it can make all the difference for how the community perceives the project outcomes, as well as the local leaders. Now, just to be clear, the use of collaborative public processes may have little effect on those who are ideologically opposed to renewable energy. Instead, these processes can help proactively identify people's pre-existing notions of good energy projects and avoid finding out the hard way what people won't tolerate. Gratiot County demonstrates a shining example of how to make the most out of the public process by shifting away from the mindset of what do I have to do toward what is going to work. And what works for community engagement in renewable energy siting must be explored and taught by academics, supported by politicians, implemented by practitioners, and demanded by the public. In doing so, we will no longer be just spectators of climate change, but rather we'll be the ones putting out the fire. Thank you.
We were all once creative geniuses. In 1966, George Land, working with Beth Jarman, used a creative problem-solving test to test NASA engineers. And they decided to use that on 1,600 4- and 5-year-olds to test how creative they were. And the results were outstanding. 98% of them tested at the creative genius level. Well, they decided to follow these kids as they aged to see how things went. And when they were 10 years old, unfortunately, that creativity had plunged down to only 30%. And by the time they were 15-year-olds, sophomores in high school, that was now only 12%. So they decided to go ahead and test adults now. And so they tested 280,000 adults using the same test to see what their creativity was. And they discovered that only 2% of adults 35 years old, around 35 years old, tested at that level. The kind of creativity I'm talking about here is solving complex problems, problems that seem to have no solution. But what I'm about to say will apply to any kind of creative effort. So let me give you an example. The man in the wheelchair is Michael Johnson, who broke his back when he was 12 years old in a motorcycle race. Now, he still races NASCARs. He's an amazing guy, thanks to modifications to the vehicle. But there's something he couldn't do. He can't shovel his own driveway. So he came to my creativity class to ask my students to see if there was some way they could come up with some ideas to help him be able to do that. He said he wanted to be able to do it from his non-motorized wheelchair as cheaply, as easily, and as quickly as anyone else could do it. Students' hands immediately shot up. They all had the answer. So he called on one and they said, just build a carport. Another one said, hire the 13-year-old next door. And then another one really thought he had the answer. He says, dude, just bolt a blade onto the front of your wheelchair. You're welcome. So Michael explained very kindly why that wouldn't work. And I asked, how many of you out there thought about the blade on the wheelchair? And scattering of hands went up across the room. The thing about a first idea is it's generally not going to work. It's very predictable, and if it were going to work, there'd be blades all over non-motorized wheelchairs everywhere. So we decided to start our project, which was a creative problem-solving method, learning a creative problem-solving method called design thinking. And at the end of that process, 2 students actually came up with a solution that not only didn't involve a shovel, it didn't involve a wheelchair. They devised systems where it just prevented the snow from getting onto the driveway at all. One of them had a small lawn sprinkler hooked up to a vat of saline solution with a pump. Mike wanted those installed at his house immediately. So this is how you solve a creative problem with a creative idea. That's the kind of creativity I'm talking about. So why the plunge? What goes on? Why the plunge in our creativity? Children are born curious. They're also fearless explorers of their environment. And they're like this because they need to fill up this incredibly empty brain of theirs with knowledge that'll help them survive in the world. But another thing they're also born with is the fight or flight mechanism, the fear mechanism. And this was great for dinosaurs, but it's not so great today. Instead of fearing dinosaurs, we now fear a society that can reject and judge us. And this kind of fear is disastrous to creative thinking. Our fears generally start with enculturation, learning the rules of a society, whereas people are telling you what you can and can't do and definitely should and shouldn't do. And that completely defines what you will and you won't do. But conforming at some level is important for a society to function. Otherwise there'd be chaos, right? But not at the cost of our uniqueness. There has to be a balance somewhere. So what are the societal forces at work that stomp on our uniqueness? Well, that's a picture of me. And I'm going to use examples of me here for 2 reasons. One, I have relevant experience, but also, the pictures were just bargain basement price. So you'll notice that I'm a little chubby here. I'm a little heavy set. I don't know if you can say chubby. Sorry. You notice I'm a little heavy set here. Well, that doesn't go over with peers, who are the first societal factor to limit our beliefs in ourselves. I was the target of bullies in such a big way that it was scary, and I wound up sort of hiding and becoming self-loathing. I hid behind a cloak of invisibility and baggy clothes. Friends are another thing that limits your ability and your behavior, your thinking and your behavior. The tribe that you belong to. They're totally cool with you. That's why you're part of their group. But if you start doing something that they're really against doing, like maybe talking to another group or doing something that they're just simply against, they're probably going to have a problem with that. And so that does restrict your behavior. Another thing that really limits us in society are families and parents. I was just a weak, timid cartoonist when I was 12 years old living in Texas. But my father decided that was probably not good enough for society. He wanted me to be tougher, more manly. So he signed me up for football, Texas football, and they really love their football. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. The coaches didn't like me, the players sure didn't like me. And my parents came to every game to see me play, but I never played in a single game. That left some pretty big scars. Parents can say things like, why do you have to be so different? Why can't you be like everybody else? They do this because they love you. And they want you to live the American dream. You know, they think they know what is right for success, and you don't. What success looks like, and you don't. And often they pressure their kids into pursuing academic and career paths that'll achieve their idea of the American dream, which causes young people to crush their own dreams. Schools are another factor. Despite all the heroic teachers out there doing their best to maintain our creativity and build our curiosity, it doesn't stick around because the system doesn't work for that. For one thing, schools are a strong mechanism for teaching and learning to behave rules. And if you don't, you're punished. But creativity operates in a space that challenges conventional thinking and rules. Schools also make you study a broad range of subjects, which is important because, you know, you need a broad range of knowledge to get along in this world. But they also make us study some of these things at the advanced levels. And failing at those advanced levels can be devastating for your GPA, your chances for getting into college, and for your self-esteem. I was one of those kids. I wanted to go to art school badly. I was an artist, and I thought it was pretty good. But I couldn't get into any art schools because of my grades in math and science. Which seems weird, not getting into art school because math is bad. It just didn't seem right to me. So I've never been to college. I never went. I just started off on my career, and I wound up being very lucky and successful in New York, one of the top in my field, and eventually became a university professor. But a lot of people aren't that lucky. They can't overcome the damage that was done to them when they were younger. So all of these things and other things send messages that who we are is not okay, that we're broken. And we're absolutely not broken. But what we do is we bury our uniqueness and we conform to stay safe. Know that these things are still in us, they're just dormant and need to be freed. So how can you reclaim that dormant, hiding creativity and yourself? There are 5 things I'm going to talk about. 1, get your curiosity on. You know, you need to add unique knowledge to your brain in order for you to think better than everybody else who has the same shared experiences in the room. So instead of going to London and Paris like everybody else your age, go when you have bad knees like I'm about to. Instead, go to the Amazon. And I don't mean Machu Picchu where all the tourists go, I mean the jungle. The place where the plane won't come back for a week to pick you up. It's really fun. Number 2, push your comfort zone. Being risk-averse is death to creativity. Facing your fears fosters self-growth and understanding, and it makes you less fearful. Now, you don't have to eat bugs unless you're curious, but you should do something that you just will never do in a million years. Figure out what those things you just will never do, figure out they were, and start checking them off the list, and I'm going to try that, and see what happens to you. I think I was able to overcome my fears because my desire to attain something or to get something, do something, were always greater than my fear of doing it. And if I didn't try to pass into my fear, I probably just didn't want it very badly. Number 3, learn brainstorming techniques. Our brains think in predictable patterns, and that is not going to get any great ideas going anywhere. We need to find ways to break out of the confinement of our brain and trick it into being more creative. And there are a lot of techniques that will help you do that. The design thinking thing we did with our students was one of them. If you're a business or organization, think about the corporate structure that you have there and find ways to help it be more creative, to nurture creativity in that establishment. Even if you're not the boss, there are ways to do that, and they will value your intentions of doing that. Number 4, get your courage on. You gotta risk criticism and judgment by showing up in front of 400 students wearing a wedding dress that doesn't fit. But you need courage just to speak up in a meeting without censoring yourself, because the idea you have might be just the one that's going to solve the problem. Plus, you'll be appreciated for being the different voice in the room. Lastly, don't be your worst critic. Challenge the negative assumptions you make about yourself and try to frame them more positively. These thoughts can be subtle or they can be obvious, but you got to listen to the butterflies in your stomach, and you have to try to find what you actually are thinking about yourself that put a ceiling on your potential. So if you work on these 5 things just a little bit every day, you will start to release that trapped 5-year-old that's inside of you in order to create again. And that's worth doing. That's it, folks.
$5 trillion. Remember that number. I'm going to come back to that later. Backing more women-led companies will transform the tech industry. Over the past 20 years, I've built my career in Silicon Valley. I've been a leader of 6 startups, including Path, Boingo, and Acompli, which was bought by Microsoft and is now Outlook Mobile. Hopefully many of you have that on your phones today. I'm proud to say that of the 6 startups, 4 were acquired, 2 became publicly traded companies. My first startup was Software.com. It was an email tech company. And I guess I like email, because I started an email and I ended an email. It didn't exactly end, but that was the last company I sold. In 1996, personal email was not a thing. You had voicemail. And my friend said, what are you doing going to an email company? Who's going to have a personal email address? Well, I guess we all know that answer. Now I sit on the other side of the table as a venture capital investor. I invest money in startups that have incredible growth potential, like email. There's a risk in putting up these funds. A company could fold before making it big. But there's also an opportunity for above-average returns if you make the right investments. My colleagues and I invest in companies that build software to fundamentally disrupt the enterprise. I hear pitches or meet with 10 to 20 founders every week, and only 10% of the startup pitches I hear are from women founders. I'm a focus group of 1, but this data is indicative of a much larger problem. The research backs it up. Women are about half as likely as their male counterparts to start a new business. Since the founding of the New York Stock Exchange in 1817, only 22 companies have been taken public by women. Most recently, Whitney Wolfe Herd, the founder and CEO of Bumble. And after dating, networking, and meeting friends, that's one woman every 10 years taking a company public. Meanwhile, hundreds of companies go public every year. 2020 saw a 27% year-over-year decrease in venture funding to women entrepreneurs. That decrease matters because the baseline was so low. In 2019, all female founding teams earned just 2.8% of the capital invested across the entire US startup ecosystem. The situation gets worse when you look beyond companies making products for women as consumers. According to Crunchbase, women building companies that offer gender-neutral products and services amass only 54% of the funding that female-founded, women-centric companies receive. In other words, as a woman founder, you're likely to get more money if you're building a women's cosmetic brand than if you're starting a cloud infrastructure company. I'm sure you've heard these stats before, but right now, they've never been more urgent. The global pandemic has triggered more family care needs, and according to NPR, women are dropping out of the workforce at 4 times the rate of men. All in, over 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce to date. How do we solve the problem? How do we help more women build big careers, lead successful startups, and take companies public? I have 3 suggestions. 1, inclusive representation. Right now, if you search for company founders, you're likely to see a photo that looks like this. Don't get me wrong, I understand these guys have built very impactful technology, but it's time to extend the spotlight to more people. We need to flood the internet with coverage of great women founders. When we're talking about the most successful entrepreneurs, we need to talk about Rihanna, or Tory Burch, or Oprah, and not just Henry Ford and Andrew Carnegie. I actually had the great honor to serve on a panel along 2 incredible women, entrepreneurs, pictured in the center column here. Lisa Price, who was the founder of Carol's Daughter, a beauty brand and pioneer of the natural hair care renaissance, and Joy Mangiano, inventor of the Miracle Mop and Huggable Hangers, and many other things. She used to appear on the Home Shopping Network. I'm sure some of you have seen that. These women bootstrapped their businesses and achieved incredible success. But I can't help but wonder what they could have achieved if they had received the funding and support, the backing they deserved earlier on. As children's rights activist Miriam Wright Edelman has written, it's hard to be what you can't see. In our collective remembering of this quote, we take it a step further. You cannot be what you can't see. To expand opportunities for women, we need to proactively promote the visibility of women. To activate the next generation of iconic female CEOs, we need to elevate more women founders across the board. Women who are young, women who are old, women of different races and ethnicities, women who are pregnant, women who are moms, women who are single. Let's put them all on a pedestal. Let's seek out and celebrate the diverse stories of entrepreneurship. The next way we can support more women entrepreneurs is through check writing and hiring or promoting more women in venture capital. There actually are some hopeful trends here. In 2019, the number of female check writers in VC grew from 9 to 12%. But progress is slow, and it deserves more attention. We need to elevate venture capital investing as a career to more college-age women. We need to eliminate the myth that venture capital is accessible only to Ivy Leaguers or former founders. Careers in venture need to be accessible to everyone to better realize more equitable distribution of venture funding. In a career that is so dependent on personal networks to surface great investment opportunities, we will invest more inclusively when those personal networks diversify. A third way we can support women building big careers is through comprehensive parental leave. We need mandatory paid parental leave at the national level. The United States is the only developed country without mandated paid parental leave. I actually experienced this firsthand. When I was pregnant 23 years ago with my daughter Emma, I was working for a big tech company. I was one of 2 women in the sales team, and we didn't have a maternity leave policy. I could take time off and not get paid, or I could go back into the office and earn my commission. So I had my daughter on a Wednesday, C-section, and I was back in the office on Monday. Luckily, parental leave is becoming a competitive benefit at many corporations. But not everyone works at a large company, and we need to ensure that everyone has the support they need at the big life milestone of growing a family. You'll note this slide says parental leave and not maternity leave. Josh Labs is a top global expert on modern dads at work, and in a recent piece on Melinda Gates' website Evoke, he shared a crucial part of the fight for gender equality has long stayed in the shadows: support for men as caregivers. When women no longer have to internalize the problem of caregiving, when it's actually a shared responsibility and there are supportive policies in place, we will empower an incredible wave of women's leadership. Why should you care about all this? What do we have to gain by empowering more women to build big careers and lead companies? Number 1, better workplaces. Research says women in the workplace inspire organizational dedication. They decrease employee burnout, and they increase job satisfaction, and they activate more meaningful work. Number 2, there's a faster pace of innovation. Research out of Southern Denmark University shows that companies that want more innovation should increase the number of women in leadership positions. There's a direct correlation there. And number 3, financial return on investment. These 2 final stats are from BCG. Businesses founded by women ultimately deliver higher revenue, more than twice as much per dollar invested than those founded by men. If women and men participated equally as entrepreneurs, the global GDP could rise by $5 trillion. There's that number. Gross domestic product is an indicator of economic health. In other words, investing in women will make our global economy much stronger. We cannot afford to continue ignoring or underestimating women founders. We have so much to gain by empowering more women to build and lead great companies. Backing women will transform the tech industry. Thank you.
I wish I could remember more of my dreams. Do you ever wake up wanting to remember a dream, only to watch it fade away forever? First dream I remember was when I was around 7 or 8. It was the summer Mom was teaching me and my best friend how to swim in a small pool in the backyard. In my dream, the backyard was flooded, not just a little bit, but all the way up to the top of the wood slatted fence. And in my dream, I could breathe underwater. Fast forward to 2012, the year the Mayan calendar predicted would be the end of the world. It almost was for me. It was really a bad year for me personally, and by late summer I just had to get away somewhere and find some peace. But where to? Well, around 1950, my grandparents built a cottage on Lake Michigan that my mom, dad, brother, and extended family enjoyed for many years. It's now part of the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lake Shore, so the cottage is gone, but it's still my favorite place in the whole world, so that's where I headed. I walked up and down the beach, feeling the warm sand in my toes, and was feeling better with every step. I even waded out into the lake a little bit and went in too deep and drowned the cell phone in my shorts pocket. I kept going farther up the coast. I hiked the bluff at Empires, and it was just a beautiful, pure Michigan day. So I decided to keep going. I went all the way up the fresh coast to Vans Beach at Leland, where the waves were really crashing. I was just amazed at how so many people were just in the water and splashing around. It really looked like fun. I was going to stay on the beach and eat a sandwich or read, but I thought, I just need to go in. And, you know, there's no danger. It's the Great Lakes, right? There's no sharks. So I'm going in. And I did. I stood there just near the shore, and the waves are crashing on me. I remember just looking up at the sun and feeling the warmth on my face. And I found that peace that I've been looking for. And after a while, the water's getting a little deeper, and I start walking towards the shore, but I'm actually moonwalking back out into the lake. And I thought, this is strange. All of a sudden, it's up to my chest, it's up to my neck, I'm treading water. And my brain starts working like a supercomputer, searching for anything that I ever learned that might explain what's going on here and how I can get out of it. And it came to me that this must be one of those rip currents. I heard about those on the ocean. I didn't know they were in the Great Lakes. Maybe I discovered them. But I even knew not to try to fight the current. And I got all this from the most educational television program of all time, Baywatch. It really was my #1 search result. So I knew not to fight it. I knew to flip over onto my back. But the waves were just relentless. I got into this rhythm of getting knocked down, climbing back up, taking a breath. I tried to wave, but I would just sink. I tried to yell, but no one could hear me over the crashing waves. And after a while, I started to get tired. I learned later from the buoy data that these were 4 and 5 foot waves hitting me every 5 and 6 seconds. And that a cubic meter of water weighs over a ton. So it was like getting hit by a car over and over and over. And pretty soon I got really, really tired, and I had this realization that I wasn't going to get out of this. This is how I'm going to die. And people, especially parents of young children who have drowned, often ask me, what was it like? What were you thinking and feeling? And I said, I didn't feel panicked. I wasn't even that scared. It was more disbelief. How can this be happening? I was just having the best day I've had all year, and now it's going to be my last day ever. And I thought of my mom, how devastating it would be for her to hear the news of losing a son. A Springsteen song came in my head. Up to my heart, the waters rise. Neath the water, cool and clear, drifting down, I disappear. I search for you on the other side. I thought of my dad and my grandparents who had already passed. I wondered if I'd see them soon. I thought of other family and friends and coworkers and wondered if anyone would come to my funeral. And I hoped that I would be able to breathe underwater, like in my dreams so many years ago. And then everything went dark, got quiet. I heard muffled voices as I felt that I was being carried. I sat down in something warm, and I could start to understand the voices a little better, and they were asking me if I was okay, and I asked them if I was dead, because I really thought that I was. He said, no, you're on the beach. I said, I can't be on the beach. I was just out in the lake drowning. They said, someone saved you. I said, no one could have saved me. Nobody was around. I'm just arguing with them because I'm in shock. I can't see. And I hear the sirens, and they come and get me, and they take me off to the hospital. I remember on the way to the hospital that it came over the radio that they were trying to close down the beach, and I thought, good. Then we got to the hospital, and it hit me that I probably hadn't thanked whoever saved me. And I asked the EMT, I said, you got to go back and thank them for me. And he said, it's not like they're waiting around to be thanked, Jamie. What you need to do is pay it forward. So they kept me overnight for observation and let me go the next day. And I mean, I'm fine physically. I can go back to work on Monday. I can go back to business as usual, whatever that is. And it just didn't feel right. And then a week or so later, a friend of mine from the area sent me the local paper, and there I was on the front page, right after I'd been rescued. So that was jarring. I certainly didn't expect anyone to have taken a picture. But what really got me was the adjacent article about the 16-year-old boy from the area who got caught in that same rip current less than an hour after I did, and he drowned. No one saved him. And I didn't even know the term survivor guilt, but I was asking, why me? Why was I safe? Why not this sweet boy who had his whole life ahead of him? I was even a little angry about that. And I heard a couple years later that there was an empty seat on the stage where his classmates were graduating from high school. Brian wasn't there. So anyway, I started asking better questions like, what could this mean, or what should this mean? And I reached a turning point. It occurred to me that I could use my communication background to raise awareness about these dangers, because I had just discovered rip currents in the Great Lakes, right? And I decided I'm going to learn everything I can, and I'm going to serve any way I can in the process. And I learned a lot of things. I learned that I didn't really discover them. Modern scientists have known for a while, and Native Americans have known for generations about these things. But I learned some other things, like that drowning is the leading cause of unintentional injury death in kids 1 to 4, and the second leading cause in all kids under 15. And that every day, on average, 10 people drown somewhere in the US, and they're all preventable. So we started planning some events, and after one of them, I think it was in Indiana, a bunch of us stayed after, and we were just talking about this, going, there are a lot of people working on this, but they're not working together. So we really needed to create a community of best practice. And that's when the Great Lakes Water Safety Consortium was born, and I was very honored to be asked to lead it. So our initial mission was to end drowning in the Great Lakes, but we realized that just didn't resonate with people. Nobody thinks they're going to drown. That happens to someone else, somewhere else, right? So we moved that to be our aspirational vision, but our day-to-day kind of North Star would become to help people safely enjoy the Great Lakes. And that's working better. Let me tell you a little bit more about the consortium. We're growing like crazy with members representing all 8 Great Lakes states in Ontario, where there's over 100 million people living here, plus all the visitors. We're a 503c nonprofit organization, and we have all these amazing volunteers that are working on our action committees. And these are focus areas around water safety that we've identified. And they're doing some amazing things. I just want to share a few of them. We have events. As a communicator, I know face-to-face is the most effective, so we try to have conferences and unconferences. And we pivoted to water safety virtual jam sessions, but we also have pop-up educational events we call wasabis, for Water Safety Big Idea. We have contests for middle schoolers to design and come up with taglines to help keep their classmates safe, like, you're not a fish, so wear your life jacket. And, Luke, I'm your father, swim with me. We just love seeing these entries. They're so fun to go through. We also recognize heroes, whether it's part of their day-to-day job or whether it's someone that was just in the right place at the right time and had the knowledge to do the right thing safely and save someone, or people that have dedicated their whole careers or lives to water safety. We also have products like universal beach warning signs in English and Spanish, and we're trying to get these all around the 10,000 miles of the Great Lakes coastline so that you're interrupted on your way to the beach, just to know that there might be some sort of danger to look out for, which, again, I had no clue. And we try to focus not only on water safety fundamentals, but innovations. So we'll gather some of the best and brightest students we can find to use innovative problem-solving techniques like design thinking to empathize and ideate and prototype. And then we have good old-fashioned print brochures. We've distributed so many of these, and there's so many more to go. These have a fold-out poster with one of those winning designs from the students. But inside, we have our top 10 crowdsourced life-saving water safety tips. And you can order these brochures for free from our website, but I'm going to share some of these with you. This is the most important part of my presentation. I want you to know these things. And the categories, we break them into are avoiding drowning, escaping drowning, and safely saving others from drowning. The first one is stay dry when waves are high, also known as when in doubt, don't go out. That was my mom's favorite after she learned what almost happened to me. But trust that gut instinct. You can enjoy the beach, right? You don't have to go out. But if you do, know before you go. Check the weather forecast, National Weather Service Weather Channel. See if there's any bad weather coming, high waves coming, check for warnings. There might have been a storm on the other side of the lake last night, and the waves are just getting here, even though it's a bright, sunshiny day. There's even these meteor tsunamis that happen on the Great Lakes that people don't know about. So just check for warnings. And the QR codes on our beach warning signs, if you see one, you can scan those and see warnings as well. Then if you do get in trouble, like I did, remember to flip, float, and follow. Flip over onto your back, conserve energy, control panic, breathe, inflate your lungs with air so you're more buoyant as you float, and then follow the path of least resistance back to the shore. Now, I've been doing this long enough that I feel confident in saying that the Great Lakes are actually more dangerous for swimmers than the oceans, because salt water in the oceans makes you more buoyant, so you can last longer if you get in trouble and wait for help to arrive. People that come from the oceans to the Great Lakes feel like, they say, the water's weird here, it's heavy. So it is different. There are also more lifeguards on beaches around the oceans instead of at the Great Lakes. We're working on that. We're trying to get more. The best investment a community can make to keep their residents and visitors safe is lifeguards, who are the real-life superheroes. And on the ocean, even though the waves are bigger, they're farther apart, so you have more time to escape if you get trapped. And then the last thing is that they have piers on the ocean where the water just passes underneath. On the Great Lakes, we have breakwaters, even though we call them piers for some reason. But the water crashes into them. It can create these structural currents that push their way out towards the lake, colliding with the incoming waves, and it creates this washing machine effect. So if you jump off just for fun, or if you're walking on the pier to go get a close-up look at the pretty lighthouse, and get swept off by waves, it's going to be really hard to get back up on that pier safely. So that's why we stay clear of the pier, and why I believe that the Great Lakes are more dangerous. What's it? Oh yeah, the shark. I forgot about the shark. Okay, oceans have the sharks. So the next one is break the grip of the rip. Again, don't try to fight the force of the current. Even an Olympic swimmer can't fight the force of a rip current. Swim to the side. And then I say the last one is our most important one, and that is buy a life jacket, bring a life jacket, and wear a life jacket. I mean, don't expect that you'll be able to put one on as you're drowning. You don't put on your seatbelt as you're about to crash. You don't put on your bike helmet as you're about to fall. So don't think you can put this on as you're about to drown. Get a Coast Guard approved life jacket. Adults, get one too. Set a good example for the kids. Preferably something in bright colors, not blue or black. Maybe with a whistle. You can wear it for miles and wear it, whether you're stand-up paddleboarding, whether you're kayaking, whether you're giving a TED Talk. I mean, you never know, right? There could be a video tsunami at any moment. So I think I have time for about 3 more really quick tips. You can listen faster than I can talk, so let me just go through 3 more bonus tips. Learn to swim. It may seem obvious, but everyone should know how to swim. But as you picked up, it's not enough. You need to know more than that, and that's why I'm sharing these other tips. But know how to swim. The next one is save yourself first. Just like on the airplane when they say if the oxygen mask drops down, put yours on first before you try to help someone else. Grab some flotation before you go after somebody in the water. So often we see would-be rescuers become victims because they didn't grab something. I'm telling you, these lakes, they don't care if you're this tall or you're this tall. It makes no difference to the lake. So look around for a life ring or any other rescue equipment that's at that beach. If there isn't, look around and see what other people brought. Maybe there's a soccer ball. Maybe there's a big piece of driftwood, maybe there's a cooler. Try to throw it to them if you can to keep yourself safer from the pier or from the beach. And if you do decide to go out after them, keep the flotation between you and them. And then the last one is yell for help early. This is ultimately what saved me. You know, drowning doesn't look like drowning. In Hollywood, it's all yelling and waving and splashing. But in reality, it's swift, subtle, and silent. The closer you get to drowning, the harder it is to yell. All you can do is gasp for air. So I yelled for help early. I didn't think anyone could hear me, but two brave strangers commandeered a kayak from a local cottage, and they got to me at the last second. So I still haven't met them. If you're watching, thank you. As you may have guessed, my story has a happy ending. One summer more than 30 years ago, I met an amazing girl. We went our separate ways, but then we reconnected, we fell in love, and we got married back at the beach where I almost drowned. And that's a better way to make the front page. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you all so much for attending our virtual experience tonight. I want to give a massive thank you to our TEDxMSU team of undergrads and to our incredible speakers for making tonight possible. It's been an absolute dream to help share Michigan State University's ideas worth spreading with our campus community and with the world. We wish all of you a bright 2021, and we can't wait to see all of you again at next year's conference. Thank you.